Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and I'm going to bring you yet another Voidforge build as the weapon. Well, it still hasn't been nerfed, it's still pretty fucking good, and it's still pretty damn underrated, as it seems, since when I first started this character a couple days ago, Voidforge was 5 Chaos still, and there's plenty of them on the market. Long story short, it's just not that well understood an item, and I guess the two-hand meta is somewhat in the funk at the moment. But I would say that building a proper Voidforge character definitely kinda removes any sort of the stigma that two-hand metas should have, because in my experience, every single one I've done with every two-hand type of skill has been incredibly fun, amazing, and successful. So here is a Voidforge character that is this time around a raider using static strike. So I wanted specifically to have a character that ran pretty fast because my previous one didn't run that fast, and then I wanted to just use some sort of a bit of a niche skill, and in this case it was static strike. Synergizes fairly well with running fast, and this is where we're at. Wanted to use two-handers again, and I could have crafted a weapon that was, you know, an exquisite blade or a flesh ripper, bunch of physical damage, something like that. But considering Voidforgers are so cheap, I thought no harm done in using one of these. So it is a static strike Voidforge raider doing pure elemental damage, as Voidforge does not allow you to do any physical or any chaos, and we are scaling that through flat physical damage, elemental to attacks, and then a bunch of frenzy charges, while also running around pretty fast with all the phasing and evasion that we have. So the other sort of side goal for the character is I did want to be somewhat dodge heavy, and that's why I did take the phasing side of the tree, took phase acrobatics as well, got something like 50% spell dodge, 50% physical dodge, and that does make for a much tankier character, even though, wouldn't you know it, I'm wearing Abyssus on this character. A raider, two-hand character with Abyssus, and it's been pretty damn good so far. Not many things have killed me or can, and hopefully in the end, for proper endgame damage, we have something happening, because static strike is not the greatest single target. It's a really nice clear, but it's not the greatest single target, and hopefully dodge and evasion goes a long way to making me tanky. You can also see that I use Consecrated Path in the build. Now that is just a Fortify activator, similar to Leap Slam, but Leap Slam is just a little bit too slow for this playstyle, I feel, when you could have a very instant Fortify in the form of Consecrated Path, as well as a gap closer for your static strike. So it doesn't really do any damage, though it certainly could, and I think the playstyle actually kind of inspires me to sort of mention that you can definitely do a two-tiered skill system here and run Consecrated Path on a 6-link, Static Strike with a bunch of duration on another 6-link, keep up Static Strike charges with the Helm Enchant as well. You should have something like, what, 8-9 second Static Strike charges, and then run around Consecrated Pathing everything to death. I think that actually could be a pretty effective way of playing the game at the moment with a character like this, but I wanted to build strictly into a Static Strike character, so Conk Path is just purely there for Fortify triggering. But that is something that you may want to look into in your own sort of setup, though it may be a bit tedious having to you know, have two separate skills when you could just run around mashing Conk Path and everything. Who knows? Up to you guys. So the character has been pretty damn good for delving thus far, as you can see. You run very fast, you can run through all the mobs, your cart runs pretty fast for it, and Static Strike has a good enough range and chaining ability to basically cover all the bases around you quite comfortably. And you can see that I'm running Herald of Ash and Herald of Ice. Not really doing too much on the clear side. They are, for the most part, just aesthetic pleasing skills to attach to your bar, because they don't do much damage either for a Voidforge build, and I'll go over how you scale Voidforge in just a second. But for the most part, auras are not too important, aside from Herald of Purity and maybe some blasphemies, maybe a aspect of the spider. But I've just gone the Herald of Ash, Herald of Ice, because it's pretty easy to slap them in, and it is very pretty to use both of them. But you can see the playstyle here. Slap around with your Static Strike that uses Ancestral Call, so one hit in a pack should generate you 3 charges for the most part, and then Conk Path every now and again to close the gap, or you can just run straight from one pack to the next, but Conk Path does keep up our Fortify, so I try to press it somewhat relevantly often, though like I said, you can just be running from place to place because you are pretty fast. Just a small example here on a beachhead where currently I've gotten up to about tier 15 maps and it has cleared quite nice. Beachhead, it seems to have just farmed very nicely, and overall just the entire raider system here of running fast, having decent attack speed, but then also having the phasings, the dodge, the spell dodge, seems to be a pretty strong character in the current meta, even though overall you'd probably build a stronger Pathfinder with a similar sort of setup, something like the Charge Dash Pathfinder that I did a couple leagues ago now. And then just a small bit of single target so far. This is the only 2 bosses I've done, Empowered Breachstones for Zoth and for Tul. So let me go over how I built the character so far. So here is the character, currently level 91, called Pog-Tato Raider, looking something like this, and it's been pretty fast on the leveling, 18 hours with Static Strike to get to 91.5. Static Strike all the way through, and it is built around the Voidforge sword, which I think is still criminally underrated, and that is largely because I think that it's not fully understood by a lot of people. It's probably one of the best two-handers out there and the easiest to build around just gear-wise, because you can simply just stack a bit of flat physical and then some elemental damage, and all of the damage is right there in the sword. So what it does is it starts off with a decent amount of physical damage, and then all of it gets just turned into elemental if you can through various means. Like a Static Strike, for example. So where's our boy here? Static Strike, 60% of Fizz converted to Lightning. So you start out with 100% Fizz, which disappears unless you convert. So you convert Static Strike to 60% there. You now deal 60% Lightning damage. If you can then get more conversion, let's say my gloves over here have 20%. I now have 60% Lightning and 20% cold. And then if you want, you can grab another node, something like this. And let's just say you then have 60% lightning, 40% cold. So now 100% of the initial physical damage is converted, and that's your base damage. But there's a huge line that says gain 300% of weapon physical damage as extra damage of a random element. Now you don't have to do any converting, you don't have to do anything for that to work. That's already going to happen, and that means that your current physical is then applied as a different element, fire, cold, lightning, at a rate of 3 times more. So simply put, currently when you open your Path of Building, like I have here for example, this is my Static Strike hit, 283k. Now Path of Building cannot incorporate this by itself as a default because it's a random element, so it's not going to pick it for you. So the way you actually incorporate it to show its real damage, because as you can see, 283k Static Strike hit, nothing too impressive, but it's, you know, a starting point, let's just say. To actually show your true damage, you have to edit the item yourself and thus do this. So the easiest way of doing it is then to just average it out among the 3 elements and make each one of them deal 100% all the time. Unless you're specifically spec'd into a lot of lightning damage or some shit, then in general this should be a good way of showing you your true damage. So you go 100% of physical damage as extra damage of a random element, get rid of random element and say as extra fire damage. You then put in that 3 times and change this to cold and this to lightning. And all of a sudden you should have infinity more damage, something like an additional 3 times. So this is only showing the current converted damage I have, which is 80%, the lightning and the cold. This then shows you all of the extra damage that you are getting on every single hit. So we save that and all of a sudden I'm at 1.3 million per swing without anything too insane. in the scaling department because it is just simply all built into this sword. That's why the last 20% of conversion isn't that important in my build, because I'm already dealing 380% of the initial sword's damage as elemental damage. So if I then want to go ahead and get another 20% cold, that means I'm going from 380 to 400% elemental damage. So it is still an upgrade, but it's only like 5% damage, so I have not bothered to fully spec into this or run another conversion node, or rather conversion craft as a prefix. I just took damage as flask instead, just mostly to kind of prove a point here, but you certainly can convert all of it if you really want. So that's our starting point for how the sword works. Hopefully that was somewhat clear enough, but I'm sure it wasn't. I'm not the greatest at explaining that stuff. What that means then is that every point of physical damage you get is going to give you an extra 3 times in return of elemental damage. So things like an Abyssus with the flat physical become very important because, as you can see, there's not a lot of physical to start with. So as you get more and more physical, it's going to convert, or rather give you an extra 300% of ele damage every single time. So you really want to get as much flat physical as you can. So you got a bunch there, you got some there. We don't really have much there or there because our rings are mostly utility. But for the most part, an Abyssus takes care of business, and so does a Law Weave for all of your flat physical needs. And then all of that is converted to elemental and extra elemental, and then you start scaling through things like weapon elemental damage or elemental damage with attacks. You can get a bit of that on your rings as well. You can get some on your belt. You can get some wherever you can, and thus on your passive tree too. So on your passive tree, you are now scaling lots of physical damage, but you are also scaling your elemental damage because the physical will still scale before it's converted or added as extra. And we've got this one last little node to get there too. So what this actually means is that any extra other converted or physical to elemental is not that important, which is why hatred for our build isn't that great. Picture a build that currently deals 100% physical damage. A hatred aura 40% of extra cold is pretty damn big. This build already deals an additional 300% elemental, so a hatred aura on top of that makes it 340, and that's just not that impressive, which is why we don't run hatred and rather go for some utility things like Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, Herald of Ice, and a War Banner. You could also squeeze in a aspect of the spider, I think, instead of one of these, but like I said, I just went for these for aesthetics and ease of use. So that's basically how the build works around a Voidforge, but around Static Strike is just a bit more conversation to be had. Static Strike starts out with a bit of melee range, so you do hit from somewhat of a distance, and it really thrives off of having a chain support or some additional chain. So the way Static Strike functions is you hit, and then you get a charge of static, and then you can run around for 4 seconds dispersing that static. It does chain. It is based off of an area, so area effect scales it, which Voidforge has a bit of as well. And so you really want to go with something like Touch of Anguish or a chain support while running around with this thing. It is noticeably much better on clear speed when you actually get a chain support in, but you do need the damage to be able to facilitate this chain support, and then ultimately when you're against single target it'll feel terrible unless you take your chain gem out and put in something like a hypothermia, or even in general just take the chain gem out, because 32% less damage is terrible against single target and it doesn't add any actual damage. On top of that, you're also culling your damage a bit by using Ancestral Call, which is huge quality of life in getting your static strikes up. You can ultimately get rid of that as well, put in some other support like damage on full life, and then slap completely melee if you want a lot more damage, but it feels bad not having Ancestral Call while clearing, so bear in mind if you're going to do that, it will probably suck to actually play with. And then besides that, we have melee physical damage and elemental damage with attacks. And of course, since Voidforge has terrible crit, we have the crit strike support. You can also go a bunch of other crit stuff like, you know, a crit chest from Elder base, but a Law Weave is just a super solid choice in this build for everything it provides. The crit, the ele, the fizz, the stats. The ele resist, the life, which there isn't much of, but yeah, it's a super solid choice and I haven't used many of them this league. I did then kind of min-max my gear a bit, and it's not going to look too cheap at this point, except for, well, this ring was like, I don't know, 100C, but it's nothing too special. This amulet was like 10C. These things go for a dime a dozen. And the boots to start with were, I think, something like 5C, but I managed to exalt on a resist, so now they're pretty damn nice boots with triple res, life, and the temple dodge mod. So you can buy boots with some life and the temple dodge mod, movement speed mod, and then get some resist, and that does help playing your raider out. As well as that, I also bought a belt that started out at like 40C or something, and once again exalted on another resist, so it becomes a slightly nicer belt. And then gloves, these are a piece of piss to make. They're not even that important, but we didn't really need attack speed since the beams off of Static Strike, the pulsating secondary beams, don't scale off of attack speed, and I've got enough once my frenzies are up in general that I don't really want anymore, so I multi-modded them to look something like this. And then of course Abyssus. Static Strike duration is some pretty good quality of life, but by no means necessary. I played my last Static Strike without it. And of course you got your Lore Weave, very easy to get these days. A 6 link only costs 3x even. We'd also have our Ancestral Warchief beefed up over here with some Hypothermia, early damage with attacks, Ruthless, and Melee Fizz. 6th link will probably be something like Conk Effect. Over here we have our entire Herald of Purity setup, which is Cull Strike, Enlighten, and Blind. And then we have Leap Slam, Faster Attacks, Fortify, Conk Path, and the entire utility setup of all the Heralds and shit over there. Passive tree, pretty straightforward, just a fairly generic raider tree, I'd say. Most of them are going to look something like this. Picking up all the frenzies, getting your phase acro and your dodge, your sword crit, all of your life nodes. Probably going to also grab Vile Pact, since most of the time I don't really get hit, and the extra leech rate could possibly help me out. Try to aim for about 6k life, probably won't get there. You really do have to squeeze a lot out or sacrifice some DPS to get to 6k life, but all I really want to show you guys was how good Static Strike and how good Voidforge can be. If you really want to push the limits of just about any skill right now, I think Paradoxica plus Abyssal Dual Scaling will be the way to go, but that's going to be vastly more expensive than just slapping on a Voidforge, getting a bit of elemental damage here or there, some flat fizz, and going to absolute town. I'd say it's a very fun weapon. I do recommend using it. It might look a bit confusing, but it's really no more confusing than any other item once you know how it works. If you want to know what the micros are as well, just before I leave you, that is a Dragon Hunter Longsword with the Dominator weapon effect. I think it's a very nice sword micro these days. Oriath body armor, Subjugator helm, Empyrean back attachment, and whatever the fuck boots and gloves, doesn't really matter. And we've just got a pretty crisp looking character. Hopefully next couple of days I have some single target to show you guys in the end game for this build. But for now, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.